This podcast is brought to you by Whisper, the digital communication platform that's changing the game for local governments. Whisper makes it easy to boost community engagement and keep citizens informed through SMS, email, social media, voice messaging, and more, all from the one platform. Better yet, it's easy to use and requires no technical skills. To find out more, head to whisper.com. That's WHISPIR.com.
Coming to you from Independence, Missouri, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. I'm Lauren Palmer, the Director of Local Government Services for the Mid-America Regional Council, and your host for today's episode. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. ELGL is currently looking for member and listener input on its new strategic plan, and that includes the GovLove podcast. This is your chance to shape the future of ELGL. Visit elgl.org/strategic plan. That's elgl.org/strategic-plan to get involved, share your thoughts, and make a difference. Today I'm visiting with Lawrence Greenspun, Director of Public Sector Engagement for the Drucker Institute, and Mark Funkhouser, President of Funkhouser Associates. Mark and Lawrence, welcome back to GovLove.
Happy to be here.
Hey Lauren, hey Mark, very happy to be here.
Great, we're so happy to have you too. And you are both among our all-star cast of past GovLove guests. And we've invited you back today together to talk about your new partnership to help local governments plan, implement, and finance transformational change in their communities. But first, we want to begin with our lightning round. So I'm going to ask each of you, what did you want to be when you were a kid? And Mark, we'll let you go first.
I wanted to be a forest ranger. I had this idea that I could be up in that tower, looking out with binoculars at potential fires.
I mean, isn't that essentially what you did as mayor? You know, up on that towering city hall, looking out over the city, putting out fires every day.
Yes, that's true.
Lawrence, what about you?
I wanted to be Irish. I was, I don't know, interested in leprechauns and anything that was green. And as I got older and was interested in literature, so I always felt I wanted to be Irish when I grew up. But it turns out there's more to it than wanting to be it.
Okay, you wanted to be Irish, but you wanted to be a leprechaun? Am I understanding this correctly? No.
I wanted to be Irish. In other words, it sounded
Irish.
like a good thing to be.
Okay. This is maybe the most interesting answer I've ever received to this question. Like, what kind of made you think of that as a career path?
I really, maybe because my last name was Greenspun, I always loved the color green. And then when I saw and heard things about Ireland, it was a green-focused place. And then I was a little guy, and leprechauns looked interesting. So I always read books and followed things that had to do with Ireland as I got older, and was interested in being a writer, and fell in love with James Joyce. So I don't know my interest in being Irish. I'd still say I want to be Irish when I grow up. I spent a good deal of time there.
I was about to ask, have you visited Ireland?
Numerous times. I've had my pint of Guinness and a shot of Jameson's, but there's still more to it than that.
This is great because as we're recording today, there's a huge snowstorm that I'm looking at out my window. So it's nice to think about greenery in Ireland. So thanks for sharing that. All right, our next question. What is a food that you hate that most people enjoy? Lawrence, we're going to let you take this one first.
Okay, well, I don't like anything spicy. My idea of a highly seasoned food is mint chocolate chip ice cream. So just think of something spicy, and that's not for me.
Oh, okay. You would fit in well. I'm the only one in my family who likes spicy, so I'm always wanting to cook spicy, and that doesn't work for the others. So, you would fit in well around here. Mark, what about you?
Well, this isn't exactly a food, but I'm not a fan of wine. Everybody I know likes wine. I'm a beer and whiskey guy, and wine I'm just not interested at all. I don't like it.
It's an acquired taste. You just have to drink more of it.
Well, I guess I'd have to get started. And, after the first glass, I'm like, what is this? I
Yeah,
mean,
you
it's
don't.
like grape juice, but not exactly. No thanks. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the
well,
wine and cheese party, I'm the guy who wants a beer.
yeah, beer and whiskey is every bit as effective. So if it's not broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
All right. And our next question, what made you smile today? Mark, you can go first.
Well, I had a couple of things. There's a group of my college buddies and I, and one guy, and we communicate on email and Zoom and all that a lot, probably almost every day. And one guy sends daily jokes. So the first thing I see in the morning coming across is some joke, what he calls his daily distraction, and they're always cute. But then Nick Kittle, who does a lot of work in local government, posted on his Facebook page today his little son dancing to the Oompa Oompa song and singing it, and it's quite cute, very nice.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I like that. Lawrence, what made you smile today?
Hearing Mark say that he doesn't like wine but is happy with a beer or whiskey made me smile, so that I know the next time when I get together with Mark exactly what to order for both of us.
Yeah, that's good. Got a clue there. Okay, and our final question, tell us about your hidden talent. Lawrence, you go first.
I'd say my very hidden talent is that I have great hair. It just became kind of shy once I turned 50 and doesn't like to show itself. But I know for sure it was there, but it's just hidden now.
That's perfect. That's a good one. Mark, do you have a hidden talent?
I read a lot of books. I don't know, 30 books a year probably. And I remember the key ideas from books that I read decades ago. And it turns out to be very useful, but it's not something people would know unless they knew me really well.
No, that's a great one. That is a really good talent, because I have an incredible talent for forgetting everything that I've read the instant I've read it and then having to reread it. So I am envious and impressed. So that's great. Appreciate both of you sharing kind of some fun answers for us in our lightning round and letting us get to know you all a little bit better. And now we're going to dive into our interview and get to know you even more. So, Lawrence, I'm going to start with you. We always ask our guests to just tell us about your career path and how you got into your current role at the Drucker Institute.
Sure. I mean, probably like every other Jewish studies major, when I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, I went to work for the Philadelphia Eagles football team. And then after that, I spent roughly 30 years ping-ponging back and forth between being an educator and a writer of mediocre fiction before joining the Drucker Institute in early 2009, when I basically just called an old childhood friend of mine looking for some writing work. And the last I had known, he had been the business editor of the Los Angeles Times. And he said, I left the Times, but I'm at a kind of startup social enterprise think tank. Did you ever hear of a guy named Peter Drucker? I said, no. He said, well, I remember you. It's easy to teach you to Drucker. I couldn't teach you the other things that I think you already have. Come on up. I have a job for you. So that's how I started at the Drucker Institute. For the past 10 years. Maybe it's 11 years, I've been overseeing our work in the public sector through our Drucker playbook for the public sector. And then most recently started partnering with ELGL on an online certificate program for public sector leadership.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to talk more about Drucker Institute. And of course, we're interested in your work in the public sector. But now I'm fascinated that you have this history in fiction writing. I mean, do you have some books out there that we could check out?
I have a couple of short stories that have been published in obscure literary magazines. I have a self-published collection of short stories. And I just finished writing a novel a few months ago that's being recorded now as an audiobook that I'll probably be releasing sometime over the summer whenever the recording is done.
Okay, well, that's great. GovLove listeners love audio content. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that. So tell us more about the Drucker Institute and the work that you do there for anyone who's not familiar with your organization.
Sure. Well, the Drucker Institute, I'll start with our mission statement, which is strengthening organizations to strengthen society. We're a nonprofit social enterprise consulting group, basically, based at Claremont Graduate University outside Los Angeles. So we service the Drucker Archives, which supports research related to the life and work of Peter Drucker. I won't go into who Peter was here, but he in depth, but he was a leadership and management teacher, professor, but also consultant, worked directly with heads of state, with government leaders from around the world, with corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders. We basically take his concepts and make them applicable for the world today. So we're an archive of Peter's work. We work in the private sector. We produce a corporate ranking system that measures the organizational effectiveness of the S&P 500 and other publicly traded companies. So the Wall Street Journal publishes that every year, and we use that as a basis for consulting business for companies that come to us for how to move up in those rankings. For nonprofits, we offer something called spring cleaning, which helps nonprofits identify not what they should be doing, but what they should stop doing, so they can free up resources and capacity to produce outcomes, better outcomes on their core programs and priorities. We run a multi-sector initiative called Bendable that focuses on what it would mean and take to create a community of lifelong learning. So the city of South Bend has adopted that process and system. The state of Maine has adopted it, and we have more communities on the horizon. We run the Harbor Freight Leadership Lab, which is another multi-sector initiative. We partner with this on the Harbor Freight Tools for Schools program, which is, I think, part of the Harbor Freight Tools Foundation. And the program serves as an incubator for programs that boost K-12 public school skilled trades education across the country. And in the public sector, in addition to the Drucker Playbook for the public sector, which is has an online form where people can take leadership and management training online. We have a live delivery format for it, where a city will, let's say, have me come in and work with their leaders. We have a hybrid version that's partial online and partial live. And then we have that partnership we have with ELGL and our sister organization, the Drucker School of Management at Claremont Graduate University, in which we offer an online certificate in public sector leadership. And then finally, we have the partnership with Mark and his team at Funkhouser Associates, as you said, to offer strategic implementation and financial planning services for transformational change, which is a fancy way of saying we'll help you figure out what to do, how to do it well, how to pay for it, how to measure and assess its efficacy, and if it should prove worth going forward, how to make it fiscally sustainable in the long run.
Thanks for that overview. And of course, we're going to hear more about that work that you mentioned with Mark. You all are really doing a lot in the service of the public sector. So glad to hear about that. Looking forward to hearing more about one of your programs specifically. But first, I want to pivot to Mark and give you a chance to share more about your background and career path. We gave a teaser in the lightning round. I think most people know that you have a background as a mayor, but just tell us more about your career path and how you got into your current role with Funkhouser and Associates.
Well, I went to college essentially to play basketball and discovered by accident political science. Was very interested, and I graduated with a degree in political science and went to work in social service and with the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation in Pennsylvania. And I became very interested in doing essentially social work. And I got a master's degree in social work and became a social worker. And I taught at a small college in West Virginia, social studies, social work, that sort of thing. Met a student who I later married and left there to go to the Tennessee State Auditor's Office. I was just looking for a job, and they were looking for someone who wasn't an accountant. They hired me, and I began to do program evaluation and then performance auditing for the State Auditor's Office, and I really took to that. I mean, it was essentially an opportunity to do positive change, not for, say, my individual caseload as a social worker, but for an entire government system. Say, instead of 300 kids on my caseload in foster care, I could do 5,000 kids in Tennessee and make the foster care system work better. But to be an auditor and to do well and to be promoted, I needed to know some accounting. So I got an MBA in accounting and finance. And then I decided that what I really wanted to do was be sort of on the ground in local government, state government, basically regulated and that sort of thing, but did not do much direct service delivery. And I wanted to sort of be closer to the people. So I applied for a job in Kansas City as the city auditor and got hired and stayed there as the city auditor for 18 years, during which I got a PhD in public administration and urban sociology. And then toward the end of that time, I was concerned about coming recession and where the city was going, and I wasn't happy about where the city was going. And so I took an early retirement and threw my hat in the ring to run for mayor. And I won, and I became the mayor of Kansas City. And that was my real postdoc in urban governance. I learned a lot. I made a lot of big changes and did not survive my second election. And I was hired then by Governing Magazine, where I became the publisher. And I really liked that. If I were to rank sort of the jobs that I've had and which one was the best, they kind of got better as I went along. And being publisher at Governing was really great. But then the parent company closed the magazine, and I cast around for about a month or so about what to do. And then I started this little company, Funkhouser Associates, with several of my former colleagues at Governing who I really like and admire. And I'm, have an opportunity to just keep doing what I was doing, but without a parent company or the overhead, and still with the same people that I like working with.
Cool. So tell us more about your company, Funkhouser Associates, and what kind of work you all do.
So we are a consulting company that we seek to build impactful and effective relationships between state and local governments and private companies. We look at policy, for example, is aspirational. We all would like to do this great thing or that great thing. But F&A, we work across sectors to connect the dots between policy and process. So between, say, population data and improve community outcomes, between technology and human-centered government. We have lots of experience in the inner workings of how policy is built and funded and enacted, and we try to match up public sector needs with private sector solutions. Everything that the government does, it relies on private companies for the software, for the technology, for the machinery, everything from snow plows to smartphones. And we try to figure out, based on our passion about and empathetic understanding of local government, how to best match those things up. And the ultimate objective for our work is more efficient, effective, and equitable local government, because that's where people live, in local government.
Right. Okay, great. Well, we've kind of teed it up here. The reason we've asked you on the podcast is because, the hot topic right now that everyone's talking about in local government is federal stimulus funding, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the new IJET, has the potential to be transformational for cities and counties, but it's also overwhelming. Earlier this year, I hosted a podcast with Ellery Monks that honestly was a bit of a downer. Ellery, through her work at the Atlas, exposed that cities and counties lack the workforce capacity and the flexible procurement policies to enact the kind of transformational change that I think we all envision through this federal legislation. So I'm pleased today to have the opportunity to speak with both of you and maybe offer our listeners a little bit of hope. You've launched this new partnership to help local governments with their strategy and financial planning to maximize success and maximize utilization of federal funding. So, Lawrence, I'm going to kick it back to you to just explain to us the nature of your partnership and what makes your approach so unique.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I'll circle back to the starting point for everything for us, which is the Drucker Institute's mission, which is strengthening organizations to strengthen society. I oversee our public sector work, where the mission narrows down to provide public sector leaders with tools for increased effectiveness. And I think we've done that very well over the past decade, working with several thousand public sector leaders. But in trying to track my outcomes back up to that big picture mission of strengthening society, we've actually developed some metrics to try to measure that. I realized that we needed something deeper, something longer lasting, something embedded in the actual day-to-day work done in the public sector than what can happen in an online training program or even an in-person training program to really strengthen an organization, to strengthen society. So I went back to the roots of our program, which are in South Bend, Indiana, where I'm based. And when we started the program, we didn't just provide training in some isolated way, but in conjunction with, at that time, Mayor Pete Buttigieg's office, we did in South Bend what I would call applied learning, that married the ideas of theories and practice and practical tools with actually implementing them in the moment that we learned them. So it's not just, here's what you need to consider as a mid-level manager in a Department of Public Works, but now let's go apply what we just learned to the wastewater runoff problem you're experiencing. And I knew we could be good at that, at figuring out, helping public sector entities figure out what needs to be done, how to do it well, how to engage with customers, both internally within your government entity and then externally in the community. We've learned so much about that through our multi-sector initiatives at the Drucker Institute, about how to ensure that when we go about these things, we're being inclusive. We're aware of issues related to equity and opportunity, ensuring that marginalized voices and perspectives are brought to the center. So I knew we could be really good at marrying these theoretical idea pieces and the practical application of them, because we've done those things. But I also knew that we were missing a fundamental piece of what it means to follow through on all of that effectively, which is the financial side. So it's not just what are the right things to do and the right way to do them, but how are we going to pay for that and how are we going to make it fiscally sustainable in the long run? All of these considerations heightened at these very complex times where there's both such financial and societal challenges and opportunities with compounded with IJA and other funding mechanisms. So we have these almost competing forces of challenges like those we've never faced before and some funding opportunities. So one choice would have been for me to go gain 30 or 40 years of experience, become one of the most respected voices when it comes to matters of finance and strategy in the public sector. Or another choice was for me to reach out to my old friend, Mark Funkhouser, who already was one of the most respected voices on those matters related to finance and strategy in the public sector, and to see if he wanted to sort of marry our two organizations' complementary strengths so that we could offer local government entities around the country and their communities an opportunity to do this, to do strategic planning, to do implementation, to do financial planning, to bring all three of those things together, and do that to do what Peter Drucker said was the aim of all his work, which was to create a better functioning society. So, I think with what we do well and with what Mark does well, and with great partners in local government and their communities, there's maybe this sort of unique opportunity to create a better functioning society. And that's what this partnership is about. And, I'll give Mark a chance to weigh in here, but I think there is something unique about how we would go about this. And I'll let Mark talk, and then I can weigh in on what I think is. I think I already described some special sauce, and I think even though I don't like spices, I think there's another spice I can add to this little pot we're putting together.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think you made the smart play to go find the right partner instead of trying to create a new strength in house. So, Mark, tell us more about that. What's the role that your team is playing in this partnership?
Well, first, let me say that I'm thrilled that Lawrence turned to us. I mean, this is an opportunity for me to use, an entire career's worth of learning, and work in a way that really could be very, very impactful and a lot of fun. Um, the I'm a finance expert. I've taught public finance at University of Kansas, University of Missouri, Kansas City, Park University, and now Tulane University. Um, and my view of finance is very, very broad. Um, I think that there's a direct relationship between the finances of a community and the community conditions. How safe it is, how clean the streets are, um, how well they plow the snow, how equitably they deliver services. Every financial decision has operational implications, and every operational decision has financial implications. And ultimately, the people that you're talking to, whether it's the city manager or a business owner or the server at the local restaurant, um, it's their money. It's all their money, and they deserve to have that money spent wisely and well, fairly, and and so when I look at finance, I look at, for example, planning. It doesn't matter what you plan to do if you can't pay for it, and you can't pay for it in a sustainable kind of way. I look at engagement, and I see engagement with folks again about their money, which is finite. It's limited. They understand that, and they can make choices when they're given alternatives and given explanations in a way that is not patronizing, not filled with jargon, but sort of straight up and direct. And so this is like tremendous fun for me. I mean, to be able to do this in a very direct way at a moment in history in the United States that is incredibly important. I mean, if you look at the last several years and forecast in your mind ahead the next several years, we are at one heck of an inflection point. And what we do and how we do it now matters so much. Um, when I was mayor, I mean, I campaigned as, I'm an auditor and I'd like to be your mayor. And the things that I would tell citizens, you know, you can't take care of the people if you don't take care of the money, and you got to be smart with the money, and that works for them. They understand. So the opportunity to marry my vision of how public finance ought to be done, um, and a key word is sustainable. You got to be able to keep doing it forever, uh, and to marry that with the uh, planning and training skill that Lawrence has, and I've seen him in action. This is really an exciting opportunity.
So, I want to go back to that planning and training that Lawrence mentioned. Lawrence, you talked about how you're adapting your successful theoretical classroom based curriculum into something that's more applied learning. So just tell us more about that and how you envision that playing out through this partnership.
Yeah. Well, I want to make clear we're not offering a workshop. We're not offering a series of workshop. This isn't training. in any traditional sense. It's training in I think, an innovative sense. It's combined learning and an application. Right? That's the model. We're offering an ongoing, in-depth working relationship, a partnership in applied learning and practice, as well as a connection to a community and network of local government leaders from around the country. In July, I'll be hosting at the Drucker Institute in Claremont local government leaders from 20 different entities who've all learned with us and applied that learning and will come together. So we're trying to set up like a community of best practice and learning. It's what we're offering differently here now is to have us on the ground with you, teaching you something, and then you put it to work. It's the difference between, let's say, learning French in a classroom with a teacher who's steeped in the most effective pedagogy, and then you go home and do French homework and you eat your dinner and you go back to work, and then a week later you go back to the French classroom. Versus doing all that in a classroom in Paris with a teacher steeped in effective pedagogy, and then going out in Paris and having to ask for directions to get to a cafe and order lunch, and then working your way back to the classroom and sharing your best practices and lessons learned with your classmates, applying those insights, and then going out in the evening again in Paris, and then keeping in touch with your classmates over the course of the year, in French, of course, and then getting together, once in a while for a deep dive and sharing what you've done and learned. So there's important value in that first way of learning. It's much more accessible. It's a much more available way of learning. But if you really want to learn to speak French, there's probably not a better way than learning it on the ground in a combined classroom and then out on the street using it setting. So we're looking for some communities that are interested in that type of process of working together to figure things out and then putting them into practice, assessing them, adjusting them, setting up a plan, to keep it going, as Mark said, with financial sustainability. So we're taking our very, we did that well, very practical, tools-based training process, where we taught strategy, project management, performance management, effective communication, community engagement, and then people would apply it or not apply it down the road. Now we want to marry the theory and practice. So, a city says we have to accomplish X. We want to figure out what to do to make our parks and outdoor spaces more accessible, better used. And so we'll do that same teaching about strategy, project management, performance management, community and engagement, but now it's applied in real time to a specific initiative. And then Mark and his team are there, play a role in all of that, and to figure out how we're going to pay for this, how we're going to keep it going financially. And so what's unique about this, what's different about it is, that piece of it. And then I think that's what's important about that is our goal here isn't to get business. Our goal here is to meet our complementary missions, which is in essence is to create a better functioning society. And our work at the Institute has taught us that doesn't happen by sending people to training at the same level that it does when you have outside people with some level of insight and expertise who can come in and do it with you in an applied situation. And so it's really that notion of meeting a mission of creating a better functioning society in these times, as Mark pointed out, that are both, I think it goes together. They're the most challenging times, which means they're also the times with the greatest opportunity.
Well, I want to bring Mark back into the conversation to kind of build on that from the financial perspective. Mark, you have that background in teaching too. And in our preparation for the podcast, you shared with me that often your students who see themselves as managing organizations are intimidated by the financial aspects of leadership. So how do you and your team make public finance more relatable?
Well, first and foremost is we tell them that they can do this, that it's not magic and it's not obscure. Um, and we use, as I said earlier, sort of ordinary language, ordinary examples, metaphors, and so forth. Um, One of my colleagues on Funkhouser Associates is Liz Farmer, who writes on public finance, and she's a fiscal policy person. And her signature strength is that she's able to explain stuff in terms that ordinary folks can get. I have had just lots and lots of experience of doing that, both in the classroom, but as a public official, talking to ordinary citizens, listening to them, explaining to them, and getting feedback from them. I mean, if they say, "Well, I still don't understand. This still doesn't make any sense to me," I know I got to adjust. And so that kind of you know uh, continuous feedback and listening to them. If you take out the jargon and you take out the sort of uh, you know, patronizing kind of language, and you talk to people empathetically with respect, and you listen to them, um, it gets easier. One of the things that I remember, so to speak, and think about is the part of the Declaration of Independence that says, with the consent of the governed, the government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. So if these people don't agree, or at least grudgingly acquiesce, then we're not doing it right. It's their government, it's their money, it's their community, it's their park, it's their police department, and we need to start uh, from that premise. But I'm sitting here thinking also, Lauren, about what you said at the very beginning about what Ellery Monks said. Uh, Kind of, a grim kind of picture because it is true. Government capacity is really strapped right now. And I see uh, Lawrence and I, the Drucker Institute, and my little company as people who will come in and stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the breach, so to speak. We're not going to fly in or drop in and say, here's a little playbook. Good luck. Have a nice time. We recognize the pressure that local officials are under. I talk to them every day in my work here, and I talked to a guy the other day who's he's got a purchasing department, 12 positions, 5 of them are vacant. That's people are stressed, they're tired, so that's we'll come in and stand with you and work with you. Lauren says applied learning. We're going to be in the trench working with you to help you make the very best use of this federal money that you can for your community for now and for the future.
Good. Thank you for that explanation. Lawrence, I want to shift gears a little bit. We're talking a lot about your internal approach here of helping teams be more effective, but there's an external piece to this work too. And I think you've got a really interesting perspective that I'd like our listeners to hear about how you're challenging local governments to adapt their approach to community engagement. So could you share a little bit with us about how you're doing that through the Drucker Institute?
Yes, thanks, Lauren. And this is something I learned when I was asked to help lead a Drucker Institute initiative that said, we basically came to Mayor Pete when he was in South Bend and said, how would you like to explore with us what it would mean to create a city of lifelong learning? And he said, great, let's try it. We didn't have any kind of plan for how we were going to make that happen. What we did is we started by engaging people in the community. And I personally asked, I think it was over 2,000 people, a series of questions. What do you want to learn? How do you like to learn it? Where do you like to learn? When do you like to learn? What barriers do you face to learning? But one of the keys here, and what you were getting at, Lauren, is we didn't announce that we'd be hosting a session where people could come and tell us this. We did some of those things, but when you do that, you'll get the usual suspects. You'll get the people that are always involved. What I did is I went to the local Goodwill and asked if I could speak to the people in the job training classes. And I asked them those questions. I went to senior centers and just sat down and talked to seniors there. Asked them, what do you want to learn? How do you like to learn? I went to homeless centers and spoke to the clients there. I went to high schools throughout the city and spoke to hundreds of high school students. I went to the state penitentiary to identify people who were about to be released back to the community and asked them the questions about learning. I went to Bible study classes at churches. I put my Jewish studies degree to work and gave a biblically based sermon on lifelong learning at Vida Nueva, a Spanish-speaking church, and then spoke to the people afterwards about what they wanted to learn. I met any individual for coffee who wanted to meet and ask them those questions. And my point here is that if you want to be effective in making your community part of your planning or strategic plan or getting insight, is you cannot host people. You need to go be hosted by people. You need to go where they are. You need to go to barbershops. You need to go to churches. You need to go to salsa dancing night at Vegetable Buddies, a little, a restaurant here, and grab people off the salsa floor and ask them the questions about, in our case, it was lifelong learning. In your case, maybe it's about how do we make our parks more accessible. And this is when I talked about, I think that what we do is unique, or that we're going to bring a spice or a taste to this that's different from what you used to. It's not only are we going to drive and be a part of driving community engagement and involvement in this from the opposite angle from what usually happens, is that we're also going to bring these people together. And let's say with the Lifelong Learning Initiative, we had a stakeholders committee of 60 some people that we would break up into groups of 4, and you would have a group of 4 people working together, and you might have a Notre Dame professor, a teenager, an assistant director of public works, and a young mother who were part of an early childhood education group getting together, and they were given the challenge of, if we were going to create a lifelong learning system in South Bend, what are 3 things you'd want to see on it? Applying to what we would do with you, if go back to my scenario before, if you're trying to make your parks more accessible or increase their use, it's don't host a meeting and ask people. I mean, you can and should do those things, but don't just host a meeting and see who shows up. Don't even just go to the parks and go to the people using the park and ask them. Drucker would have said you need to speak to your non-customers and your potential customers, the people who need or want your program or service, but don't know about it or can't access it. So you need to literally go find teens who spend all their free time playing video games and bring them into the conversation. You need to have seated at a table the Notre Dame professor, the teen who plays video games, the somebody from Public Works, and the mother from the early childhood group, and you need to ask them to design together one spot in the park where all 4 of them could go and enjoy themselves simultaneously. And you need to take the insights from the 15 different groups of diverse people, marginalized voices, the voices that are, and make them work together to come up with ideas. And that's the kind of work we want to do. And then that's what I'll facilitate and help make happen. Do the same thing, training your team internally in these skills. And then Mark and his team are here to help you figure out that question. How do we pay for this? How do we make it work fiscally, financially sustainable in the long term? And that's what this partnership is about. It's about doing things. It's about 2 organizations and groups of people who have spent decades learning about this stuff, and then helping all these people in local government who know these things and get them and are ready to do them. And sometimes it just takes an outside voice helping to frame it and make it happen and sell it and demonstrate it. And that's what we're looking to do. Again, back to that notion of creating a better functioning society.
Lawrence, I love what you're describing there. I think intuitively it makes a lot of sense, and I think local governments are increasingly becoming aware that there's a better way to do community engagement than just kind of our outdated notion of host a public meeting at City Hall. But when you and I talked about this before, I made the comment that it's really time intensive and local governments aren't staffed and trained in a way to do it well. And you very politely kind of hip checked me on that and said it's really not more time intensive. And so I'd love for you to talk about that and share with with our listeners what you shared with me about um, your notion that this is really a more efficient way to do engagement. Because I do think that sometimes cities know that there's a better way, but it's intimidating and overwhelming to think about doing it.
Yeah, I think the model I described is more efficient economically. I think it's more efficient in terms of time, in terms of capacity, in terms of your staff. And I'll tell you why. If you think it takes a lot of time to go out and talk to people in the community where they are, think about how much time it's going to take when you don't talk to them and you spend $2 million redesigning your parks that don't get used any more than they did before. And you've got to go explain that, justify that, revamp because of that. You know, Drucker has a famous line that he said that I think applies here. A lot of people are quoted as saying this. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So if you think community engagement is expensive, try not engaging with your community. Try waiting until there's the police involved shooting to then go try to have conversations in churches and community groups and barbershops, and go have those conversations before the crisis happens. Effective leaders preempt crises, and that's always about establishing relationships and lines of communication and bonds of trust. And so you'll save money, you'll save time, you'll save heartache by doing these things before you develop your system of lifelong learning or new park system. You'll have buy-in, you'll have support, you'll have votes in terms of voices, but also in terms of people's commitment and passion because they were part of it. So I refuse to accept the argument that it's more time consuming to get everybody's input and build it that way than to build it and then hope people like it. I don't think there's one shred of evidence that would support that other method.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. Well, just to summarize our conversation, I want to give each of you an opportunity to maybe just give us one little succinct piece of your advice for our listeners who are trying to do the most good for their communities, yet feel overwhelmed with the magnitude of IJA and other federal funding opportunities. What's one little piece of advice that you would give them to encourage them on their journeys?
Well, I've got this one, which is um, take your time and take care of your people, your staff, your employees. There's when you get on the airplane, they say if oxygen fails, put your own mask on first before you help somebody else. Um, so first, we have to do this. Spend the federal money by like 2026. So you can't play around forever, but be deliberate, be careful, take your time, and recognize that in order to do the job well, you need to really take care of your employees.
And I'll play off that, which is I'm gonna, as long as I've been turning things on their head, I'm gonna take the expression that we all hear: we need to learn how to do more with less, and turn that around and say we need to learn how to do less with more. And that is, we need to try to do way fewer things than we're trying to do, and we need to bring more capacity and resources and time and thought to the things that we're doing. You need to pick up one very graspable rock, toss it into the still waters around you, choosing very carefully in which pond you throw it. And you're going to watch that one rock with a 4-inch diameter can send ripples out that go 40 yards wide. So if you want to get a lot done, don't try to do so much, but do what you're doing very well and see the impact that spreads from that.
Mark, did you have another thought you wanted to share?
I just want to accentuate what Lawrence said, which is do less with more. He's exactly right. You look at a lot of cities, look at Kansas City when I was there, 450, 500 programs. Scale back, prioritize, and then deliver really, really well on the fewer things. So I think Lawrence nailed that.
Yeah. Well, great insights from both of you. Thank you so much for joining us on the GovLove podcast and sharing some suggestions, some resources, and a hint of optimism about the future and the opportunities for transformational change. As we wrap up, we always close with this question. If you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode? And I think you each have a suggestion to share. Lawrence, do you want to go first?
First, Lauren, I wanted to thank you and ELGL. It's been great working with you, and we love ELGL. Great partnership. I, in honor of my good friend and partner, Mayor Funk, picked the band Grand Funk Railroad. And then their song, We're an American Band, which I think, there's a line from that that's sort of the anthem of what we're doing here. It's a line neither Shakespeare nor Dylan could have ever come up with. And it's, we're an American band, we're coming to your town, we'll help you party down, we're an American band.
And which is such a great suggestion. When I heard that, I thought, I don't know how you could top that. But Mark, you've got a great suggestion too.
Well, yes. Parliament Funkadelics. We want the funk, gotta have the funk. There's a whole lot of rhythm going down.
Well, so we're going to leave it to our production team to break the tie, and we'll see which song makes the cut. But I think both of those are great suggestions. So listeners, here's your chance. Party down with the great team from Funkhouser Associates and Drucker Institute. And good luck on your journey to drive transformational change in your communities. So that ends our episode for today. Thanks again so much to our guests, Lawrence Greenspun and Mark Funkhouser. Just a reminder, it's not too early to start planning for hashtag ELGL22 coming up in October. This year we're gathering in Phoenix, Arizona on October 13 and 14. Early bird tickets will go on sale soon, but most importantly, plan on being at the most engaging local government conference of the year, so start making your plans now. Thank you for listening. You can reach us at elgo.org/GovLove or on Twitter at GovLove Podcast. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
Yes, they had a plan. They was out to meet the